Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Brian Thatcher, and welcome to Mercy Unbound. It's a show that aims to provide hope, an avenue for healing, and one that will help you understand and then live the great mercy of God. With me today, I have a special guest. I spoke with her before the show. I feel like we've known each other for many years. Heather King, my wife handed me a little piece of paper out of Magnificat years ago, and it was a fascinating story on servant of God, Rhoda Wise. And to me, it's another example of how God works through broken human beings and all these beautiful aspects of her faith. And we're going to have a great show today because we're going to talk about how the Lord and St. Therese came to her. Heather King, she's done so much work. I tracked her down. She's got a website, heather-king.com, Heather. She's an award-winning author of several books. She speaks nationwide, gives seminars on writing workshops, and she also writes a weekly story for the Angeles News, which is the diocesan paper of the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. So she's all over the place. She's busy as a bee, but writing some incredible stuff. So welcome to Mercy Unbound, Heather. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much. I'm just so happy to be here.
Share us a little bit about your own faith walk and how you became involved in writing and doing all these things for church, particularly the Magnificat and for the Angeles News.
Well, speaking of writing, making crooked lines straight, and I write memoirs, so I've written about my conversion and about my recovery from alcoholism and um, all facets, and I've written on prayer, and so my faith is very, very much the ground of my writing, even though I write not exclusively for a Catholic audience, but hopefully for all of humankind. But just briefly, so raised in the coast of New Hampshire, a big family, not Catholic though. We were Protestant, lived across the street from the Protestant church, and went to Sunday school there. And blue collar family. My father was a bricklayer and my mother was a housewife. So they instilled such wonderful values, one of which is hard work. There was no sort of, oh, I'm so tired. I mean, if you want to get some money or go get a job. So but anyway, I went on to go to the University of New Hampshire. I moved to Boston when I was in my early 20s. And I unfortunately, I don't even want to say unfortunately, because who would I be if not for, I have the disease of alcoholism, and it kicked in very early. I was probably a freshman in high school, and very quickly it became my organizing principle, which is to say, my God. And I do think alcoholism is a form of mental illness, almost a kind of possession. Thank heaven Jesus had a deep heart for such people. And so anyway, I was just a terrible, terrible barroom falling down drunk in Boston for years. And during that time, I went to law school and graduated from law school because I'm super disciplined, even in my disease. I like to get straight A's, and somehow, but I was completely unable to work in even as a waitress, which I had the job with which I'd supported myself when I got out. So my family had an intervention for me. I got sober in 1987. I got married soon after, and my now ex-husband and I moved to Los Angeles, and there I began working as a lawyer, passed the California bar, and had a deep crisis of vocation a few years in, because I was so grateful to be sober, and I'd started to believe in that sort of searching for a God of my understanding. And I knew I was not put on this earth to be a lawyer. I could do it, and I could have done it for my whole life. But I had this dawning realization of, I hadn't even I barely knew Matthew 25, when the sheep are separated from the goats. But I knew, as I think every human being does, deep in our heart, we know we're going to be called to give an account of ourselves. It has to be somehow. And I just knew I cannot die without ever having responded to this call of my heart. And the call, which had been there from a very young age, was to be a writer. So I ended up, I've written about all this, but through years of agonizing prayer and so forth, I ended up coming into the church, quitting my job as a lawyer, and beginning to write. And I was in my early 40s at the time. So I was no, um, I have been a late bloomer all my life. Let's put it that way. It was a real leap. I gave up the first real money I'd ever made in my life. I gave it up, and I have never regretted it for a second. But that's how I began to make my way as a writer in the kind of mid '90s. And then I have always, from the beginning, I never wanted to write sort of material curated for a market. I never wanted to have a sort of shtick in the Catholic world. I've always wanted to be neither right nor left, as Christ was not, but I'm just a follower of Christ. I'm a huge Therese of Lisieux uh, follower. And I think she's a wonderful example. She had no special charism. She was not remarkable outwardly during her life. And her vocation, she said, was love. And so that has kind of been, in my stumbling, faltering way, has been my path as well. And the church, against all odds, because I have a pretty checkered past, not that, thank heaven, that disqualifies in a way that qualifies you to be a member of the church. But the church found a place for me, without a platform, without, oh, I'm new evangelist person, I'm the alcoholic who's now Catholic. Like, I never put a label on myself. I just wrote from my heart. And the church somehow has found a place. A friend of mine originally gave some of my work to the then editor of Magnificat, Father Peter Cameron. She gave him a book, my conversion book, Redeemed. And he asked me to start writing for Magnificat. That was many, many years ago now. And kind of the same thing with Angelus News. I would write these little pieces about walking around my neighborhood and the flowers and the people. And they too approached me. And I've been writing a weekly column for them on arts, culture, faith, and life for 10 years now. So
Now, is your witness on your website, or get the book regarding your own personal conversion? Is that on the website, or how would they get that book?
there's a yes, it's all my books there's tabs for each of them on my website, but all my books just go just on Amazon or used on eBay or wherever. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Now, let's talk a little bit about Rhoda. Rhoda is called a servant of God. For some of our viewers or listeners, they may not know what that means. What is a servant of God?
Well, I'm no expert in the canonization process. It's still a bit of a mystery to me. But servant of God is a title that is bestowed upon you at a certain stage of the canonization process. I can never remember how it goes. I think maybe first you're declared venerable or blessed. There's venerable, blessed, servant of God. It goes up from there. And finally, you become a saint if all goes well. So the point is, she is in the process, and her cause for beatification was opened on October 7th, 2016. So
Now, I find this story fascinating, particularly also because I'm from a small town in Ohio, as was she, little town she grew up in, Cadiz, and it's only got 3,000 people.
mhm.
Looking up the town last night because it's on the other side of Ohio, I was kind of surprised to see that they said, well, Clark Gable was from Cadiz. I thought, well, that's interesting. Um, but Rhoda wasn't even raised Catholic like you. She came in later in the church, didn't she?
Yes. She was born to working class Protestant parents. And in fact, the family was sort of virulently anti Catholic. So um, she was the sixth of eight children. So she had no backing in Catholicism at all. That came later.
One introduction, it seems, was when she was 16 and she got sick. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, she suffered a burst appendix, and she was, of course, put in the hospital. And a nurse at the hospital gave her a Saint Benedict medal, and she kept it for the rest of her life. And I think that was, she didn't come into the church then, but I think a seed was planted, and you don't keep a medal for nothing. So that's how that kind of went. She got married briefly to a man who died, and then in 1917 she married a man who was a widower, George Wise. They adopted two daughters. Rhoda had a ton of real suffering and loss in her life, physical suffering, emotional. So they adopted two daughters. I don't know if she was unable to have children herself, but one of them died in infancy, one of the two daughters. So there's already loss there. And also George was a total alcoholic. And as happened, as you said, small town. So everyone knows everyone's business. And his alcoholism was a source of deep shame and I'm sure sorrow, and also poverty. I think because of his drinking, either he couldn't work, they didn't have, or he drank up all the money. So,
I find it fascinating because here you have this small town at about an hour's drive from Akron and Canton, and you had the husband an alcoholic, and you had Dr. Bob was from uh, Akron, who founded AA. He was a raging alcoholic. Then you had Sister Ignatia from Cleveland, who was transferred there, of the Sisters of Mercy,
mhm.
and the tie-in with Mercy Hospital. And then there was another young girl from Canton, just an hour away, uh, who later became Mother Angelica. There was a little tie-in with
Mm.
that as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, later on down the line, the woman who would become Mother Angelica was someone. Several things happened in between, but yes, was someone that Rhoda prayed for and helped heal. Later became Mother Angelica. So yeah, it is interesting. I mean, you could say, oh, there was a ton of alcoholism in Ohio, but there's a ton of alcoholism everywhere. But no, it is interesting because in 19, should I tell what happened next in her life? Okay. So in 1932, uh, so she would have been 32 and 12. She would have been 50 almost at the time. She underwent surgery to remove a life-threatening 39-pound ovarian cyst. Can you imagine this massive cyst? Complications ensued. Then in 1936, 4 years later, she tripped into a sewer drain and sustained serious injury to her leg. So she's got all these terrible physical sufferings. And then in June 1938, she entered Mercy Hospital that you mentioned in Canton for the placing of yet another cast. Um, Interestingly, in 1939, AA was founded the very next year, and Mercy Hospital had figured prominently in that. Anyway, abscesses, adhesions, and a perforated bowel ensued. But then during her convalescence, a sister of charity introduced Wise to Saint Therese of Lisieux, who's one of my own dearest companions, and she taught her how to pray the rosary. Um,
So
so
she
I
wasn't then, right? She wasn't.
She still wasn't Catholic, no, but then after instruction, but obviously she was drawn by this, and after instruction by Monsignor Habig, Habig, a local priest, she was received into the church uh, on January 1st, 1939, and confirmed on March 7th. So I love when these seemingly chance encounters with a nurse who happens to teach someone how to pray the rosary, and somehow our hearts are ready, and we receive it, and it changes our life and the life of many people around us. So we never know where the seeds will fall.
You mentioned about her medical problems. Sometimes it's easy to kind of say what they were, but to put it in a perspective, coming from a physician, she was deathly, deathly ill.
Yeah.
And these abscesses would not heal, and they were doing everything they could, and she'd go back in and have to have them probably repacked.
Ugh.
And the pain and the discomfort, it was like, when I get a flu for a day or two, I'm like, think I'm gonna die.
Right.
These people with chronic problems like that, it's day after day after day after day. And she handled her suffering uh, really as Jesus handled his, didn't she?
Yes. Yes, because it would be so easy to succumb to complete self-pity, resignation. Plus, she's still got the husband who's drinking. I mean, that alone is a cross almost too heavy to bear. Um, so I agree. Yeah, she had something. She obviously had some kind of very, very deep steadfastness, will to live that allowed her to persevere and become a Catholic. I mean, anyone in severe suffering, the church is the place for sure. So thank heaven she found it. So as you say, her abdominal wound required constant dressing. She experienced chronic pain and discomfort. She began to keep a diary. This was when she was still in the hospital, and then she kept up the practice after being discharged. So then she's confirmed on March 7th, 1939. And in the middle of the night on May 28th of that year, she woke to find the room filled with light and Jesus, garbed in a gold robe, sitting on a chair. I guess he didn't say anything, but she had this kind of vision. Um, he reappeared as promised. He had said he would return. He reappeared a month later, this time accompanied by Saint Therese of Lisieux. When Wise woke the next morning, her abdominal wound and ruptured bowel were both miraculously healed. So,
It's just amazing to me. Again, another example. I mean, I love to read about Marian apparitions and all these miracles, the saints, um, Padre Pio. I mean, the list is endless, and it's like, people, why do you not think God exists? There's just so much in the beauty of our faith. And gosh, um, she didn't she when did she get the stigmata?
that was, excuse me. Let me see what happened after that. Oh, by the way, after another visit from Therese, her leg too was healed. Um, our Lord and Saint Therese appeared to Wise 20 more times. And then, let me see. Oh, from 1942, Jesus said to her, he told her the place where she lived was going to become a shrine. He said, in 1944, you have to build a grotto. And then from 1942 to 1945, she suffered the stigmata every first Friday from noon to 3 p.m. Crowds flocked to her side. She became known as the Miracle Woman. And if you're a skeptic, and I would have been, I come from New England where people tend to just sort of roll their eyes at this kind of thing. But the fact is, I love the church because the church says we don't know. It is a mystery. We don't know. But how can you argue with a perforated bowel that is healed? I mean, whatever you think might have caused it, in fact, a healing took place. Um, and then the miracles and the healing that flow from that for other people are further evidence to my mind. So that these, to the most ordinary people too, that these things happen is just it just delights me in a way and mystifies me, and I love that the church very thoroughly examines these things. It doesn't just accept every report of this kind of thing out of hand. It does a really, really thorough investigation. Um, so anyway, that's it. Yeah. And then in her later years, she prayed for and helped a woman, heal a young woman who later became Mother Angelica, founded EWTN, of course. 10 days before her death, Jesus appeared one last time, revealed his sacred heart, and instructed Wise to urge people to pray the rosary.
There was also, wasn't there a conversation where Saint Therese, or there was a mention that there'd be many miracles to follow or pray, there were many more things to come.
Yes, that was well, in 1940, before she suffered the stigmata, Jesus reported to Wise that the house where she had lived, prayed, and suffered was to become a shrine. And then he added in 1944, "You want to know about the grotto? It must be built. I tell you again, it will be the beginning of wonderful things to happen." Um, so she knew from that. Uh, she knew to get the shrine and the grotto built, and then um, when people visit, because the visitors flock to these places, and um, today visitors to the Rhoda Wise house and grotto are promised cures more wonderful than your own will take place on this spot. So,
When I think, years ago, a priest asked me, if Jesus came today, where would he go? And you think, well, would he go to the White House? Would he go to the president, Congress, or the rich people? And it's like, no, he'd go to the Rhoda Wises in Cadiz, Ohio, a little town. It's like amazing to think. And then we think of the scripture, who is Jesus? Just a carpenter's son in Nazareth, and
mhm.
what good can come out of there? And yet that's not how the Bible plays out, does it?
No, and I think we're continually scandalized by I think continually try to um elevate the thing above where we try to make it into a triumphant, yeah, we're gonna, I mean, the church is by definition, it is a church of humility, of poverty, of, in a sense of failure. I mean, in the same sense that Christ's crucifixion seemed to be a failure. Yeah, it is beyond anything that a human being would ever come up with for the story of God. And I have to be constantly reminded in my own life, because I'm scandalized every day by my own wretchedness and poverty, and so prey to temptation of various kinds and hardness of heart and all of it. And it's just, oh, I came to heal sick people. The righteous don't need, people who are well don't need a doctor. I came for sinners, and so thank heaven. Yes.
I think as a medical doctor, we have hospitals, but the church is the answer because it's the hospital for the spiritually sick. And so many people are spiritually sick. And yet, I've told my kids, Jesus is offering you filet mignon. And we want the ring bologna, the wrong foods. And it's all right in front of us, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, and that's a very interesting, right, I wanna be off in my corner with my little dried up morsel of cheese. "Leave me alone. I've got my own agenda. Don't worry, I'm gonna do it myself." But that's, I mean, so that would be a whole other
Yeah.
hours-long conversation, and I'm sure the questions I'm sure you've delved deeply into in your own life. But this confluence of the physical and the spiritual, of how uh, how much of our physical ailments are even physical ailments are in some sense spiritually based as well. It's not to say ever that a physical ailment is our fault. No one's saying that, but the spiritual healing that takes place. I speak as a recovering alcoholic, and you see people all the time who have suffered their whole lives, alcoholics who start to recover, and they've been diagnosed with bipolar and um, autism and Asperger's and on personality disorder, and they stay sober and follow what is basically in many ways kind of a gospel based without calling itself that, and suddenly they're no longer bipolar, they're not suffering from depression, they're not consumed by anxiety, and so it's just so fascinating how all of it is tied together.
And even in Rhoda's life, with her husband being a severe alcoholic, I just wonder, I'd love to go back and see what was going on in Akron, Canton, Cadiz with alcoholism and moving people from the jails to the hospital and letting them sober up and having God in the chapel 20 feet away from and the healings that were, I mean, it's like, what an exciting time that must have been.
It must have been. It sounds like a kind of spiritual vortex. Um, and I couldn't find any, I do one of these credible witnesses every month. And so I have to do a kind of cost benefit. I mean, I can't research as deeply as I want every single person because then I have to go on to the next person. Meanwhile, I have a weekly column I'm writing. So I couldn't I didn't see any information on the husband who was this kind of shadow figure, except that he was relieved before she died. He was relieved of the obsession to drink. And who knows how that happened? Was it, I mean, you can't help but think her prayer could have done nothing but help. Um, but who knows? Maybe he availed himself of, maybe he went into Mercy Hospital and maybe he was treated or found one of the early AA groups. But it doesn't, it's all a miracle, no matter what. It's not no less of a miracle if he found his way to AA. I mean, um, so anyway, yeah, that was a beautiful, from my own personal point of view, that was such a wonderful coda. And you felt so happy, not only for him, but for her as well.
It kind of was an encouragement for all of us because we all have brokenness in our families.
Right,
That people that we're praying for, we get discouraged and we wonder, are our prayers doing any good? And you think of Monica from St. Augustine and years of prayer, and here's Rhoda's getting, and it's like you just got to turn it over to Jesus, and He's the answer, and I can't fix it. None of us can. There's that peace, that giving it up, trusting in the Lord.
right, right. And there's the very, very beautiful and difficult to accept, but beautiful fact that maybe our prayers don't get our own kid sober, for example, but they may get someone else's kid sober. They may get someone else. This always makes me want to weep, but I think it's very true. And think of Bernadette, who founded the grotto at Lourdes, and she herself could not be healed at the end of her life. She too was in constant pain. And she said, the spring is not for me. The spring that she founded, the spring is not for me. And that just clutches my heart because, I mean, it's always for us in one way, but in another way, it's
That's,
it's for us to offer, right?
well, I think of like the image of divine mercy behind me. Those rays of mercy went through Therese and then out to others. And the river and the water, the spring is for, as you said, others. I don't know. It's just such an encouraging story with Rhoda Wise. I just amazed, from little Cadiz, Ohio, and as you said, grotto's still there. I want to hit that the next time I get to Ohio. And now you said you've been doing these credible witnesses every week. I'm just going to put you on the spot here. What's another one, the first one that comes to your mind, if you could just share a couple minutes with of a credible witness, and maybe we can get you back soon and talk more detail on that.
Credible witness I do every month. The Angelus is every week. Oh my gosh, I mean, I've been doing it for so long, and there are, I mean, there's stigmatists and there's U.S. Army generals and chaplains who laid down their life on the battlefield. Uh, but one of the, just off the top of my head, one is Sir Alec Guinness, the actor, who knew a convert. He converted, the way I remember it, partly because he did this, I think, Father Brown series. He did a couple of films where he played a priest. Another one was called The Prisoner, and it was with Jack Hawkins, where he plays an imprisoned priest under a totalitarian regime, and his interrogator and he have this deep psychological conflict. But anyway, he was dressed. The story goes that after he had a film shoot one day, he was walking back to his hotel. He still had on the garb, the costume, the outfit of a priest. And he saw these little kids and they said, "Oh, hello, Father." And his heart was just absolutely moved. And he realized, oh, if little children can respond so deeply to a priest, that maybe there's something to it. And anyway, it's a great story. He had a son who was on the death's doorstep, and he prayed and said, "If the kid is healed, I'll become a Catholic." And the kid was healed. So, but he became a daily communicant, Sir Alec Guinness, yeah, and his wife converted too. So, and there, I think, again, these that Christ walks among us. And I too think if Christ, right, you picture him going straight to Skid Row. And at the same time, of course, he's with the poor, but the poor is also within each of us. And I think, we are the leper, I am the lame, the blind. So he walks among us in many, many, many different disguises, often in the distressing disguise of the poor, but just as much disguised as a rich person that we might judge as, oh, must be nice to be flying around in your private jet. How do we know? We don't know what that person, the cross, the burden. So that's our Catholicism. Every different corner, every demographic.
Well, Heather, I want to thank you for all the work you're doing, and God is emanating from your writing, and just keep it up. And we're going to hope to have you back. People, I hope you enjoy this show. If you want to find out more about Heather, it's heather-king.com. Go to her website. She's got her witness books and others up there. And Heather, thank you again for joining me today on Mercy Unbound, and we hope to have you back soon.
Thank you so very much, Brian. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it.
Please subscribe to our YouTube channel for the video portion. The podcast can be heard at anchor.fm/drbrian, Bryan Thatcher, Thatcher, and on all the major podcast forums. I would love to speak at your church or conference, and please consider supporting our efforts to spread the truth to a hurting world. Thank you again. And for more information, go to the website at drbrianthatcher.com.